Excellent. Thank you. So in Deuteronomy 4:34, Moses said to Israelites, this was what God did.
Has any God ever tried to take for himself one nation out of another nation, by testings, by signs and wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, or by great and awesome deeds, like all the things the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes?
Yeah. So Moses was saying that God, by his mighty hands and outstretched arms, saved Israelites out of Egypt, and in order to be their God and for Israelites to be his people. So it was also at that time, God gave them very specific instructions as part of this special relationship of, now I want you to worship me as your God. And I am completely different from the God that you grew up knowing about or hearing about. So I want you to worship me differently. And that was including, so some of the instructions were the well-known 10 Commandments, together with all the other laws and instructions about how they should live as a people, and how they need to ensure justice and righteousness and fairness in the society. So now, I know that's a lot about the context, but as I said, understanding that part will help us better understanding the story today. It's not just a story, it's a historical account. So now, Moses was up in the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, receiving more detailed instructions about Israelites as a new nation. And here is what happened. Let's look into our passage today. Exodus chapter 32, verse 1 to 9.
When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives and sons and daughters are wearing, and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry.
Yeah. So Moses was up in the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. The Israelites were waiting at the foot of the mountain, not knowing what happened to Moses. So the Bible was saying that there was lightning, there was smoking coming out of the mountain, and there was great thunder. So the Israelite people were thinking, hey, this Moses dude is probably dead by now. We don't know what happened to him. 40 days and 40 nights, and he's still not coming back. So he might be dead. What are we going to do now? We are stuck in the wilderness. We probably won't be able to go back to Egypt because they would want to kill us. We don't know the way ahead to Canaan. So we need somebody to lead us. We need a new leader. So they built a golden calf. And up to here, this is a great turning point for Israelites. Before this scene, you will see that God's wrath and God's anger was to the Egyptians, the people who oppressed the Israelites. But this scene, it turned around. God became so angry. Later on, we will see in the passage following that God was so angry with Israelites. Why is he so angry? Why is making a golden calf so offensive to God? So we will be thinking that for the Israelites to make a golden calf, to us modern day 21st century people, we would think that's we don't understand why make a golden calf. But to them, it was actually something very natural to them. Remember that Israelites, they were slaves in Egypt. They grew up in a polytheistic culture. They grew up watching people sacrificing and worshipping all different gods. In Egypt, there were many different gods. And people were making sacrifices, and it was very common for them to sacrifice their own babies, and it was very common for them to do self-harming in order to please their God. So they grew up watching and listening to and talking about people sacrificing and worshipping different gods. So now that when they didn't know what happened to Moses, their response to the need of needing something to continue to lead them was very naturally from what they grew up with. So that's why they made a golden calf. To them, they actually didn't, they were not thinking that they were making a different God. You see what they said to the calf? They said, "This is the God that lead us out of Egypt." So they were just doing exactly what everyone else was doing in their culture. And you see that how 400 years of slavery in Egypt had so deeply affected their way of thinking, their perspective. It is very difficult. It's only been a couple of months since they were let out of Egypt. It's so difficult to change their mindset, to change their understanding of now this God is completely different from all the other gods that we grew up hearing about. It's going to be a long and deep work in their heart to truly help them understand why this God is different and how he is different. So, now that what you can see, let's continue to read actually God's reaction to Israelites making an idol. So let's continue. Yes.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people whom you brought up out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, 'These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.' I have seen these people," the Lord said to Moses, "and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation."
That was how angry and how, can you hear God's heart was aching? Could you feel the pain of God in his heart when he saw what Israelites did? And especially when you see the words, "I've seen these people." It echoed with what God said to Moses, actually, when he decided to lead Israelites out of Egypt. He said the same phrase. He said, "I've seen their afflictions. I've heard their sufferings." But now, after leading them out of Egypt with so many miracles, now what they saw is, "I've seen these people making them a golden calf and said to the golden calf, 'You are the God that led me out of Egypt.'" Can you feel the pain in God's heart? And I just want to point out that, a few things, right? If we go to the next slide, I just want to highlight, let's really feel God's heart here. He says, "Go down, because your people," this was Moses that he was speaking to. He said, "Your people that you brought out of Egypt." Was it really Moses' people? No, right? Was it really Moses that led them out of Egypt? No. Why God was saying that way? I'm not sure whether you experienced that. So the mother and father, when the children did something horrible, one of the parents will say, "See what your children have done." Right? God was so angry that he almost wanted to disown the people that he just married to, the people that he just made he just made a vow with, the people that he just said, "I will be your people, and I will be your God, you will be my people." But here he was so angry and so hurt, so much pain that he almost wanted to disown them. In the next sentence, "You were so quick to turn away." Only a couple of months after coming out, after so many miracles, so quick to turn away. And you bow down to it. You bow down to the golden calf. You sacrifice to it. And you've said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." These people were giving the credit and the glory to a golden calf that was meant to be for God. Can you see what idol worshipping really is about? What God was so angry about was not just that they were breaking the 10 Commandments. In the second commandment, it says that you shall not make any image of your God. So they were doing exactly what God was telling them not to do. But it was so much more than that. It was really about the Israelites' heart. It was about what they were giving the glory to. It was about what they were saying to what brought them out of Egypt. It was about the allegiance of our heart. So Christianity is never about ticking boxes. Christianity is never about a set of rules and instructions that we need to follow. Once we do all those things, then we're good. No. What God is after is our heart. I once had a conversation with my non-Christian friend, and we'll have a discussion. And I remember I said something like, I would really love to see you and I would love to see you in the new heaven and new earth. And then he said, I don't need to earn a ticket in heaven. And I said to him, the ticket to heaven, I was using his language, the ticket to heaven is never earned in the first place. It's not about what we do, it's about our heart. So now you might be thinking, I don't make carve. I don't make any images. I don't have any idols at home. I'm a rational, science-based, smart, intelligent, 21st century Londoner. I don't do those superstitious things. But I want to point out that, yes, culture might be different, time might be different, but we live in exactly the same kind of situation as those Israelites did. They grew up in a polytheistic, idol-worshipping culture. We grew up and are immersed in a culture that does not acknowledge God. Can you see that even after we got saved, how much of the world's value and the world's saying will affect, even without us knowing, our way of thinking and our allegiance to God? Idol is anything that you elevate to the position of God. Idol is anything to which you say, you are my God. You give me happiness. You give me meaning of life. You give me satisfaction. You give me dignity. Can you see that the Israelites, when they were worshipping the idol, it mentioned that they were eating and drinking and indulged themselves in revelry. There's another translation that says that they were eating and drinking and then they rose up to play. It was a very festive scene. Why? Because they were happy. Previously, they were nervous and they were anxious. They didn't know what happened to Moses. But after they made the golden calf, they were happy. Now they were relieved. They were like, oh, our heart is satisfied. We're happy now. It's the same with us. Idol worshipping is anything that our hearts seek to which that now you can satisfy my heart. You are curing, or you are releasing my anxiety, my fear. You are satisfying my longings. You are satisfying the desires of my heart. That is idol. An idol can be anything. Do you remember what they made the golden calf with? With the gold earrings, right? With the precious gold that they have. And that was exactly the same material that God wanted them to gather to make tabernacle and to make the tent, which is how they should worship God. So, idol can be any good thing in our life. And we can either use it to worship God, or we can either use it to build our idol. It can be work. It can be your friendship. It can be a romantic relationship. It can be money. It can be pleasure. It can be anything that you would sacrifice to, anything that you would bow to. And how do you know what might be your idol? Is when you have it, you feel like, oh, if I have it, that's great. And if there is something that you think that if that's taken away from you, then your heart will cry out, no, not that. Take anything else, but not this. So if you have anything like that in your life, it's very likely that has become your idol. This is why God was so angry and there was so much pain in him, because in that wilderness, he married Israelites. He made a covenant vow with them. He said, I will be your God and you will be my people. It's like after the wedding, you found out that your spouse is already entertaining and is already cheating on yourself. It's already cheating on you on the honeymoon. That was exactly how God was feeling. And can the golden calf really continue to lead them into the promised land? No. There wasn't even life in the golden calf. And then let's ask the question, how is this God different? And who is God like? We've so far, we've seen a few verses that can give us some idea of who God is. So he is powerful by his mighty hands and stretched out arms that he led Israelites out of Egypt. So we know that he's powerful. He has no rival. And he's also, he values relationship. He wanted to have a close relationship, an intimate relationship with the Israelites. And he is the same God today. And here I just want to, let's look at one verse. It was God himself proclaiming to Moses and the Israelites about who he is. Yeah, Exodus 34, 6-9.
And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation.
There's a lot that can be said about this passage. And I know that we've already been asking lots of questions. I can talk about this for a whole day, but we don't have that much time. I want to focus on one word. Well, it talks about that God is slow to anger, gracious, abounding in love and faithfulness. I want to focus on the word faithfulness. The original Hebrew word used for the word faithfulness here is hesed. I'm not sure whether I'm pronouncing it correctly, but this is how it's spelled. Hesed, that word. This word is translated to many different words in English in the Old Testament. And many of us actually speak more than one language, and you will know why sometimes there is lost in translation. It's difficult to find the perfect word for that word in your own language. It's the same when it comes to this Hebrew word hesed. It's translated in the Old Testament into many different words. For example, favor, goodness, faithfulness, love, mercy, many different translations. And I love one of our Old Testament professors, Dr. Elaine, how she puts it. She liked to translate it into the word covenantal loyalty. And immediately that makes me think of, this is such a huge contrast to what the Israelites did. The Israelites betrayed their spouse, their God, a couple of months after the wedding, but God still remained true and still remained faithful. And if we go to the next slide. So in the book that Dr. Catherine mentioned, she wrote a book about the Hebrew word hesed in the Old Testament. I have not read the book, but this is the highlight about this word. The two seemingly contradictory themes are held in tension. God's hesed is delivering protective power exercised on behalf of those who are obedient. And God's hesed is also surprising forgiveness offered to the disobedient when they are penitent. And if we go to the next slide. Here, the sovereign freedom of God and his strong commitment to his chosen people were held together in a single word. This is why this word has been translated into so many different English words in our English Bible. Because in this single word, it holds two seemingly contradictory attributes of God. He is loving, he is compassionate, he is forgiving, he's also holy. It says in the previous scripture that we mentioned, he would not leave any guilty unpunished. He would not leave sin unpunished. So he is both holy and he's both loving. Then we've got a question and we've got a problem here. How can a God both hold his holiness and his love and compassion together? And if we know that he said that he does not leave any sin unpunished, and then we know from the book of Genesis that the punishment of sin is death. It's physical death and also separation from God. So how can a God that so desires to have an intimate relationship with his people, who at the same time is so holy and will not let any sin go without punished, how do these two marry together? How can we, knowing that those Israelites, if we keep reading, we will know that they are stiff-necked people, just like what God described to them. They continue, after this, they continue to betray God. They continue to sin. And even today, some of you will know what I'm talking about when I say that our heart, Pastor Timothy Keller said, Our heart is a factory of idols. Our heart's constantly making new idols every day. How can a God so holy, desires to have a relationship with us, at the same time will not leave any sin unpunished? How can this happen? Moses attempted his solution. If we go back to our account in Exodus and we continue to read, Exodus 32, 31 to 34.
So Moses went back to the Lord and said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now, please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me out of the book you have written." The Lord replied to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. Now go, lead the people to the place I spoke of, and my angel will go before you. However, when the time comes for me to punish, I will punish them for their sin."
Moses knew that God is a holy God and he will not let any sin go unpunished. So Moses, compassionate and out of his love for the Israelites, he said to God, "Take my life." When he said, "Blot me out of the book, please forgive their sin, but if not, then blot me out of the book you have written," he was literally saying, "Take my life. If you don't forgive them, take my life." And if you know, and there's one scripture that we kind of skipped in the middle, God was so angry that he actually said to Moses that, "I want to wipe out the whole entire generation." This, by the way, it's one of the 2 occasions when God was so angry that he was moved, wanting to wipe out the whole entire generation of Israelites. So God said to Moses, "Let me wipe out the whole generation and I'll make you a great nation." And then Moses did not accept the offer. But here, Moses offered to God, "Why don't you take my life if you can't forgive them?" What did God say? "Thank you, but no, thank you." Because Moses has got his own sin to deal with. Moses has got his own problem, has got his own sin to deal with God. So that doesn't sound very nice, but it's kind of like your life is only enough to save your own life. So, yeah. And then God also said, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book." The tension is still not resolved. But let's look at closely to Moses. He was the chosen leader by God to lead Israelites out of Egypt. And he had so much compassion and love for the people that God called him to lead. And he also was so willingly, even threatening God with his own life, to ask for forgiveness for the people that he was leading. Does that remind you of someone? Actually, at the end of the book of Exodus, at the end of the book, after Moses passed away, somebody else, when they wrote down in the Bible, they actually mentioned that there was no other prophet raised for Israelites like Moses. For the whole time, the Israelites, even up to the New Testament, the whole generation was waiting for someone else, for another prophet or another leader like Moses to be raised up. And finally, someone was born for us. And this time, it was not somebody that needs to deal with his own sin. This time, it's someone who lived a sinless life. It's God's only Son, Jesus. So Jesus was born for us. Jesus was born for the tension that we just mentioned earlier on. How God can be both a holy God, will not let anything go, but at the same time desires to have an intimate relationship with his people. Jesus was born to resolve that tension. Like Moses willingly offered his life, but Jesus actually gave away his life on that cross. He gave away his life so that when we put our trust in him, that tension is perfectly met in the death and resurrection of Christ. That when we put our faith in Christ Jesus, we know that now we can come to God without fear, without any barrier anymore, that we can have full access to God's presence and full access to his hesed, his covenantal loyalty and love for us. That's the gospel. And I want to say that when you hear the word gospel, what does that invoke in you? When you hear the word gospel, have you ever experienced the grief and the ache of God's heart when we actually worship the idol, when we betrayed our God? Have you ever experienced that? If you have never experienced that, I pray that God will open up your heart to see that it is not a small thing to worship idol. And I pray that God will open up our hearts to see that how serious and how severe the consequence of worshiping idol is. Because if we don't understand that, Jesus will never become precious to us. If we don't understand how much we are grieving our God when we are worshiping idols, Jesus will only be the icing on top of the cake. So it is my prayer that that God will open up our eyes to truly see when the state of our heart. We can ask ourselves the question, who are we giving the allegiance of our hearts to? Is Jesus really precious to you? Can I invite the band up to the front? Can we sing the second song, or Have All of Me? And I want to invite everyone, feel free if you are comfortable to stand or if you're comfortable to remain seating. But I just want to invite us to spend some time before God and let the Holy Spirit really work inside of us.